Hello, hello, Rob. How are you? Susan Eldridge. Hi, Kathy Langan. Hi. And I'm. Oh,
Hello, Rob. How are you?
I got to take away the echo now. Steve Day, nice to see you. Okay, so I have a lot to go over tonight, and I didn't have time to invite people, for which I certainly apologize. Kathy says, "Hello, Joe. I've got my grandsons here tonight, so I'm not sure how much of this I'll be able to hear." I understand that perfectly well, Kathy. So you're not social distancing from your grandsons. Anyway, there was a lot of news today, and there was a little bit, okay, of good news. And Rob asked the question before I get into the good news, what's the deal with Jimmy Dore? The constant bashing is going way too far. If I can suspect anything, I think Jimmy is upset that Bernie won't go on his show, but I don't know. And Steve Day says, staying home through Easter and beyond. Yeah, we're staying home too. We do go shopping once a week for food, okay, if we need it. But outside of that, we stay at home. We do walk outside our building, okay, our apartment building. We wear gloves when we go out of the house, and we would be wearing N95 face masks as well if we could get them. But we have not been able to get them, so I guess we just have to wait for the supply to arrive. But let me get to the good news. Okay, I take it my sound is okay because I don't hear any objections. I don't see any objections. Hey, Dolores. Hi, Randy Hedgebeth. Great to see you. And I guess there are a number of you here who I haven't seen yet, but I know you're here. Greg Mallard. Hi, how are you? Greg, it's great to see you. Okay, so let's take a look at little screen sharing here. A couple of days ago, I reported that a really heinous thing had been done by Donald Trump and by Gilead Sciences. Specifically, what they did was to classify the drug that was owned and produced by Gilead Sciences, but that was developed with a lot, okay, of federal aid, specifically remdesivir, which is right now probably the most promising of the antiviral drugs. And what they did was classify it as an orphan drug, which basically gave a monopoly to Gilead Sciences of 7 years, okay, and had all kinds of potential for their charging extremely high prices and really screwing us with respect to this drug that many, many, many people are going to need. Well, of course, there was a great outcry, and there is a victory. There's not only an outcry, there is a victory. And victory comes about because Gilead Sciences caved to the pressure campaign and relinquishes their monopoly claim for the promising coronavirus treatment. There's an article in Common Dreams that appeared this morning. It was by Julia Conley, and she just points out that the pressure campaign was run by Public Citizen, and Public Citizen won. They won. Oops. My camera has gone a little south, so I'll be distracted for a moment while I try to fix that up. I think you can probably still hear me though because the stream is intact. So there I am again. So I guess we're okay. So Public Citizen applauded the news as a big win for those who spoke out against Gilead Sciences, whose former lobbyist, Joe Grogan, now serves on Donald Trump's so-called coronavirus task force. Yes, yes. So the company caved, and that's the news, and that's the story, and it's a wonderful piece of news, okay, and it's a wonderful story, and there was pressure from public citizens and Bernie Sanders and dozens of other public interest advocates, and they responded, and that is so important. It shows it is worthwhile to make a stink. We did make a stink about that, and we won. So congratulations to all, and congratulations to us for making that stink. Okay. So, next, there was another huge victory, and maybe an unexpected one, but one that really makes one smile. And what that was about was a huge victory for the Standing Rock tribe. And the article is from Common Dreams again. It was written again by Julia Conley, and this was from March the 25th. A federal court ruled that the Dakota Access Pipeline permits violated the law. DAPL permits violated the law. A federal judge handed down a major victory. Handed down a major victory for the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe of North Dakota on Wednesday, ruling that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers violated the National Environmental Policy Act by approving federal permits for the Dakota Access Pipeline. The Corps must complete a full environmental impact study for the pipeline, including full consideration of concerns presented by the Standing Rock tribe, the judge has ruled. The tribe asked the court to ultimately shut the pipeline down. Down, 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 down. The court chastised the Army Corps of Engineers for moving ahead with affirming the permits in 2016 and allowing construction of the Dakota Access pipeline crossing the Missouri River after President Donald Trump assumed office in 2017 without considering the expert analysis put forward by the tribe. So the tribe, in its case, made clear that the safety record of Sunoco Logistics, the company behind the pipeline, was very poor, that it experienced 276 incidents resulting in over $53 million worth of property damage from 2006 to 2016, and has one of the lowest performing safety records of any operator in the industry. And so that was a great piece of news. The Obama administration was vindicated when it moved to deny the permits in 2016. And this is the second time the court has ruled that the government ran afoul of environmental laws when it permitted the pipeline. Okay. And Earth Justice Attorney Jan Hesselman, or maybe Jan Hesselman, I'm not sure, said, "We will continue to see this through until DAPL has finally been shut down." An environmentalist, 350.org co-founder Bill McKibben tweeted, "Wednesday's ruling represented a huge victory for the tribe." Bill said, "Holy heck." "In huge victory for Standing Rock Sioux, federal judge orders review of Dakota Access Pipeline. Such thanks to all who fight." And so that's basically the story. But Earth Justice President Abby Dillon said, "This is why," quote, "this is why we never stop fighting," unquote. And this is also why we should never stop fighting. It is no good to stop fighting. So here we are. Now we move to some news which is not so good. Well, let's put it this way. It may be good for some people, but in the long run, it is not good. And I'm sure you can guess what the news is. It's the U.S. Senate's final stimulus bill. Why it won't be enough. And again, I am sharing my page. This is an article in Counterpunch written by Rasmus, but Jack Rasmus, who's an economist. He does some macro and some micro, and he's a leading economic voice in the Green Party. And his article is called U.S. Senate's Final Stimulus Bill, Why It Won't Be Enough. I thought he had a very interesting perspective on it. He describes, of course, that the bill passed the Senate 96 to nothing. Okay, I watched a video earlier today where we heard the Senate leader Moscow Mitch talking about how the vote was 100 to nothing, mentioning that 4 times. So another liar, the vote was only 96 to nothing. That was bad enough. He didn't have to make it 100 to nothing. But anyway, the bill now goes on to the House, and there Nancy Pelosi indicated she was going to rush approval of the package, seeking a unanimous voice vote in the House. She wants to have the unanimous voice vote in the House so that there will not be a call for a count of the vote if there is a call for a count of the vote, then it would be necessary to get everybody back to Washington for that particular count. And Nancy Pelosi deliberately set up things in that way so when the Senate finished its work, that if the bill was acceptable to her, she could put a big barrier in the way of people who wanted to make further objections to the bill. She knew parts of it were not going to be very palatable to the progressives, and many to a number of conservatives in the House also. But anybody who speaks up and requests that and says that neither unanimous consent exists, nor is do they consent to a voice vote in the House, she knows that anybody who does this is going to be causing all the members of the House to come back from where they are and take the count. And this, of course, would make the person in the House, whoever it is, the person or persons, extremely unpopular, because it would make the Congress people travel back to the Congress and expose themselves to the coronavirus, of course. And since some of them are already sheltering in place, some of them, one of the latest being Katie Porter, having a diagnosis for COVID-19, which is positive, okay, at this point. They certainly don't want to come back to the Senate and spread the disease to others, or perhaps cause their own recovery from the disease to be slowed down. So, of course, the person taking the unpopular view that everybody has to go on the record, that person would then be viewed as risking everybody's life, of course. So that's a pretty high bar, okay, for a dissenter to overcome, and Pelosi knew that, and that's why she put it together in this way. And she and McConnell also collaborated to create a bill that would couple bailouts for business and bailouts for people in the same bill, so they could create a bill that people had to vote for if they cared about the bailout for people, but that they would not, okay, have voted for if the two things were separate. So this is the importance of leadership in both of the houses. We see it here. The leaders can put together bills that they know will be unpopular in one part of the caucus, okay, or another part of the caucus, but that might have enough goodies that people from both sides would have to swallow hard and vote for the bill. That's why it's so important, okay, that the progressive forces in Congress do not cave to Nancy Pelosi in 2021. Do not vote for her again as Speaker, because she will be putting together more and more and more of these shit sandwiches. This is what is going on. Anyway, Rasmus says, here's what the terms of the stimulus package looks like, according to initial summaries by the Washington Post and CNN, released within minutes of the bill passage. Uh, the middle class and worker households would get 500 billion in the form of direct checks, 250 billion approximately, and increased unemployment insurance benefits for the next 4 months, 250 billion. Corporations and businesses would get 867 billion and 367 billion. Would get 867 billion. 367 billion of which would go to small businesses, and another 500 billion to large corporations like airlines, defense companies, cruise lines, hotels, okay, and other companies. Well, this is not quite a correct reading of the situation. We'll correct it, okay, a little bit later, but to go on. Also, additional funding of 130 billion would go to hospitals to purchase the medical supplies they need. State and local governments would get 150 billion to shore up their finances, which they're certainly going to need since their tax revenues are going to collapse, because since people will be off work, they won't be making very much, and therefore they won't be spending very much. And the state and local governments, of course, are dependent on sales taxes, okay, and on income taxes, very largely. And the tax revenues would be falling away, and state governments would be facing austerity without this 150 billion, and even with it, they might be very stretched. So, other funds would be provided by the government small business, the SBA. This is $10 billion to help to pay their debts. The reference is made in the package as well for another 20 billion in a bailout for farmers, raising that total from the 30 billion spent to date during the U.S.-China trade war to 50 billion. While it appears the 130 billion for hospitals and 150 billion for local, state and local governments, there is, in addition to the 867 billion to business and 500 billion to households, it's not clear if the 20 billion bailout for farms and the 10 billion for the SBA are included in the 867 billion or not. So that was not available when this went to press. He then says here's a further detail and breakdown of these amounts. The airlines get their 58 billion they've been lobbying for. And if past breakdowns still apply, it means roughly half the 58 billion will take the form of outright grants, not loans, to the airlines, and the remainder as loans. It is also unclear if the loans will be forgiven after 6 months, as has been proposed before in past versions of the Senate bill. There's also another 17 billion of the 500 billion. So 58 billion and 17 billion is 75 billion. The 500 billion, which is earmarked for defense companies considered important to national security. No details are released about who these are and why such companies that are not affected by consumer demand should receive such an increase. That is, what hardship are the defense companies going through due to the collapse of consumer spending that requires that they should get $17 billion? The answer here is, in parens, possibly to backfill money that has been transferred from them by Trump to help to pay for his wall. The wall again. He's using the recovery bill to backfill money he took from them in violation of what Congress wanted to help to pay for his wall. But Nancy Pelosi's going along with this, of course. Trump has also indicated he intends to have some of the $500 billion go to cruise lines and hotels which, along with airlines, are critical to his own company's business. There is something in the bill which says he and his family are not to benefit from this, but this obviously means that they're not to directly benefit from this because they don't own the airlines or the cruise lines. Okay. But those airlines and cruise lines are critical to his hotels and some of his other businesses in major cities around the world. So it was important to him to have the cruise lines operating, even though I don't think it's very important to most of the American people. So there's that. The remainder of the $500 billion is designated for spending to support other industries, whether in the form of loans, grants, or other forms of assistance is still unclear. And here's where I want to come in and critique a bit. It's pretty clear that the other $425 billion of the $500 billion is going to be used to back much larger lines of credit that the Federal Reserve is setting up for these businesses. In particular, it's been reported by many that the $425 billion will be used to back credit lines being set up by the Fed at a 10-to-1 ratio. So the funding that will be made available to these businesses as loans will be $4.25 trillion at extremely low interest rates. So in other words, these big businesses are not getting just a bailout of $500 billion. They're getting a bailout of at least $4.75 billion. And the Senate bill always included $350 billion in loans for small businesses, and the provision that the loans would change to outright grants if used to pay wages and payroll costs. However, of course, that same rule doesn't apply to the big businesses. They don't have to pay wages and payroll costs in order to get their loans. The obvious thing to ask is, why not? It won't take clever accounting to use the $350 billion to cover wages and compensation and payroll taxes, as companies move the money that would have been used for such purposes to other areas of their income statements. So consider the $350 billion as money without repayment, i.e., not really a loan. I think that's a good comment. In addition to the $350 billion, another $17 billion is added now for small business to cover interest on their existing loans for 6 months. Finally, there's the $10 billion from the Small Business Administration to help to pay debts, which may or may not be part of the other totals. Add in the $20 billion for farm support, the $10 billion from the SBA, and the $130 billion to hospitals. It means businesses large and small thus get $1,027 billion in direct assistance by the government in the new agreed-on Senate-House stimulus package. I've called it a stabilization bill because it's really for stabilizing the economy, which obviously has been going into free fall with the news that hit the Senate and the House while this was going on, that last week's unemployment figures showed 3.3 million newly unemployed people applying for UI assistance, unemployment insurance assistance. So the Democrats demanded that there would be an oversight board to review how corporations and businesses actually spent the 425 billion, which would really turn into 4.25 trillion, because in the previous emergency recovery legislation in 2009, the stimulus bill of the Obama administration, much of the direct assistance was gained by businesses that received it. Some even used it to buy back their stock and award bonuses to managers. The Oversight Board is supposed to prevent that. It remains to be seen, however, who will be chosen to manage the board that will make all the difference. It can be assumed that the Senate or Trump will do this, as Trump has publicly said when asked who will oversee the distribution of the funds to business. He replied, quote, "I'll be the oversight," unquote. It also should be added that there was a similar oversight board that was supposed to review the TARP funds, the 700 billion in TARP funds in 2000, okay, and 8, 2009, and so on. That oversight board was totally ineffective. And this oversight board has no power to subpoena and no power to punish. It looks like it will only have the power to write reports and make transparent to the public any shenanigans that might be going on. In other words, the oversight board is not really a review board that can tank any of these transactions that the people who are running the handing out, okay, of government money, there won't be a review board which can stop the handouts if they don't like them. Also, it's most likely the handouts will be managed and made by the Secretary of the Treasury, Mnuchin, who, as many of you know, was responsible for a great deal of mortgage fraud in California and who avoided prosecution only by the good grace of Kamala Harris when he was the president, okay, of One West Corporation after his stay at Goldman Sachs and before he became the Secretary of the Treasury. So Mnuchin is as crooked as they come, and we certainly can expect that Trump will oversee the distribution of the funds to business through Mnuchin. So middle-class families and workers get a total of $500 billion under the agreement, which is what it was before. That is, before the Senate took over the bill. So it appears that the machinations in the Senate, okay, which occurred, just involved actually moving the money around, making things more palatable. There is direct household cash assistance, okay, in the bill. The talk of $3,000 per household is now changed to a check of $1,200 for a single household member, or $2,400 for a married couple, plus $500 per child, so up to $3,400. Okay, it's unclear if that's for all children in a family or just up to 2. Well, I'm just talking about a typical family with 2 children, okay, and 2 adults. To qualify for the full $1,200 or $2,400, an individual must make no more than $75,000 income annually. Income above $75,000 phases out until $99,000, after which no payment is made. For couples, the phase out is at $199,000 per household. So there is a means test here. And the law makes clear that the standard for judging whether someone makes 75,000 of income annually is going to be based on what they made in 2018, 2-year-old data. Do you think there may be more than a few people who made more than 75,000 in 2018, but that right now are making far less than 75,000 because they've been laid off work and they expect that they'll be off work perhaps for 6 months or something like that? I suspect there will be quite a few people in that kind of category. Apart from that, there will be unemployment insurance benefits that will be increased for those whose jobs have actually been severed, because some will just be furloughed. But I guess they can get some unemployment insurance too under this. But the package includes an increase of $600 to the state's defined level of unemployment benefits. These vary state by state, actually quite a bit. But it turns out the average unemployment in most states is $300 a week. So this is going to increase things to $600 a week. I'm sorry, increase things by $600 a week. So if the 600 applies to the highest paid state benefit payment, the highest one happens to be in California, whose top payment is $450 a week. So the new payment would be $1,050 per week. Or what is that, about $4,200 a month or something like that? And the question, but will those below the top level of payment also get 600? I think the answer is yes. So if somebody gets 200 a week, they'll be getting $800 a week, but they won't be getting a $1,050 a week. So it's not the same for everybody. Jack Rasmus points out that one plus to the employment insurance provision is that it will also apply to contingent work, that is part-time, temporary, contract labor, not just to full-time employed who were laid off due to the effect of the virus on company shutdowns. On the negative side, all the improvements in unemployment insurance will take effect for only 4 months, then will expire. On the other hand, for the corporations taking the loans, the benefit of those loans, the benefit of the $4.25 trillion in loans that they'll be able to get at very low interest rates, will presumably last for years, not for only 4 months. It is clear, therefore, that middle-class families will receive only the $500 billion that had been allocated before in the form of cash assistance, one time worth $250 billion, and improved unemployment benefits for 4 months, costing another $250 billion. It appears some of the cash assistance was redirected toward improvement in unemployment insurance benefits, but no net increase in the total $500 billion on the negotiating table before. In other words, in the final stimulus bill, businesses get more than twice as much as do households in the working class. Now, this is supposed to be a bailout for the working class, okay, and for the middle class. It was not supposed to be a bailout for business. It's supposed to be workers first. Remember Pelosi always telling us about workers first. Well, she forgot to tell us about the $4.75 trillion that's going to be going to businesses, just large businesses, in the form of grants and loans. Okay, mostly loans. That looks like a bailout of big business to me, whether they need it or not. Huge, much huger, in a much shorter period of time than the 1.5 trillion in tax cuts over 10 years that we've been ranting and raving about on the left. So the so-called progressive Nancy Pelosi, the famous California progressive who's so anti-business, is now going to be partly responsible, okay, for delivering 4.75 trillion to big business. And that doesn't count the assistance that's being given to small businesses, which in many cases are not so small. So Rasmus here mentions an additional 150 billion is allocated in the bill to assistance to state and local governments. She says the totals in spending thus appear to be approximately 1,650 billion. It's being reported as a $2 trillion stimulus effect and increase in U.S. GDP overall. As Trump's advisor Larry Kudlow has said on previous occasion, the 2T represents the spending plus the multiplier effect. 2T is not therefore the actual spending. That is less, around 1.650T estimated here. The difference is a multiplier effect of about 400B. Well, the 500 billion that is going to go, as long as this is deficit spending, the 500 billion that is going to go to working class and to middle class people in the form of direct payments and in the form of unemployment insurance, but taken together, okay, is by itself going to add a multiplier effect if we consider primary, secondary, and tertiary multiplier effects. I'll wager that multiplier effect is going to be more like $1.5 trillion added to GDP. But anyway, Rasmus estimates that the 400 billion multiplier he mentions is a general estimate of the fiscal multiplier. He says it's based on normal economic conditions. And the current collapse of the real and financial economy in the U.S. is anything but normal. He says the multiplier will be much less. What he seems to be, this is because much of the spending by the government to business and households alike will be used to pay down debt, hoard the money due to expectations of future profits and employment insecurity, or to cover price gouging by businesses by selling necessities. That could be, he might be right about that, okay, especially if people have to continue to shelter in place and to buy very little else other than food. It could be the insecurity will result in savings as much as is practicable under the circumstances, and used to pay down debt. So I might be wrong, hasty in my estimate that the multiplier would be the kind we would find in a normal economy that had gone into a recession. It may not be like that at all. It may be a very peculiar multiplier, given the constriction of supply that we may see in the kind of depression we are moving into now, and the constriction of possible purchases also, because people simply can't go out. Anyway, the U.S. economy spends monthly the equivalent of 1.7 trillion. So Jack points out the Senate stimulus package is thus a one-month stopgap at best. As this writer has been arguing in recent days, the stimulus needed to get through the summer will have to be 4 trillion, not 1.65 trillion. And this is the heart of his argument. He is saying this won't be enough because due to the collapse of activity to such a degree, that stimulus is going to have to be 3 times as large. It's going to have to be 4 trillion. He then points out that 2 trillion spending plus the multiplier is estimated around 9% of U.S. gross domestic product at present. And he points out that 20% increase of GDP is necessary, raising total government spending in GDP terms from the roughly current 21% of GDP to 40%, of GDP. And he points out correctly, of course, 40% of GDP is what the U.S. government raised spending to in 1942 when we went to war at that time. It was an increase from around 15% in the pre-war period, which was the Depression, if you recall. If the fight against the new enemy, the virus, is a kind of economic war, then the U.S. will have to mobilize its economy again on a war footing. I think this perspective is the right perspective with which to view what the stimulus should be. Trump's activation of the War Production Act and then doing nothing about it further is not a war mobilization, and Trump is not a war president, as he claims. Indeed, he allowed the enemy to actually penetrate our shores and spread among us with his delayed action to stop airline travel and cruise travel. It's not an accident that the largest concentrations of the virus infections are in our coastal ports and airports. Washington State, California, New York, and now increasingly New Orleans, Philadelphia, Chicago, and Miami. And then he comments on Trump, as war president, and other fictions, and with a critique, of Trump. And points out the question follows then whether the current Senate House stimulus bill represents a sufficient stimulus to protect the U.S. economy. The answer is no. It's not even halfway there for Main Street. About that, I'm certain he's right. In contrast, however, the Federal Reserve, U.S. central bank, has quickly allocated no less than $6.2 trillion so far to bail out the banks and investors even before they fail this time. He's dead on there, dead on. And promises to do more if needed and for as long as necessary. It's writing a blank check for the banks and the investors. Everything to bail out capitalism, folks. Everything to bail out capitalism. Meanwhile, Congress provides 1/4 of that, and only 1/3 of that 1/4 for the Main Street workers and middle-class families. Finally, it is clear from Trump's statements in recent days that he knows this stimulus is only a 1-month hit to the economy. That's why he and the capitalist investors who have been lobbying him hard the past week are turning up the message that we should all start back to work by mid-April. As Trump put it, the timing is beautiful at Easter. But it won't be so beautiful, says Jack, when a surge in infections and deaths occur on top of the current surge underway by early summer. And then Jack says, but profits and money are more important to this wheeler dealer, commercial property speculator capitalist in the White House. With the U.S. budget deficit this year almost certainly to exceed $3 trillion and his election looming on the horizon, Trump and friends see Wall Street and U.S. business interests as more important than the rising death rate that is inevitable should we return to work prematurely by mid-April. And it will be premature. I mean, mid-April, it's only 3 weeks away. And that's a generous assessment. It's less than 3 weeks away. It's 26th. Only 5 more days left in March. Such action will all but ensure the eventual overwhelming of the U.S. hospital systems 3 months from now, an even higher death rate and an even greater collapse of the U.S. economy and financial system in the aftermath. Trump may think he's at war with the coronavirus, but it is the virus that is winning, and his poor generalship is aiding and abetting that enemy. Unfortunately, the American public, and especially the old and infirm, are becoming the cannon fodder in Trump's phony war. I don't know about you, but I hate being the cannon fodder in anybody's phony war, and especially Trump's phony war. But I wouldn't like it in Joe Biden's phony war either. So, next thing to share. A very appropriate follow-on to Jack Rasmus' article. Another Common Dreams article, this one. And the name of it is Looting of America by Big Corporations, quote unquote. And the subtitle is Progressives Appalled as Senate Unanimously Passes the Largest Bailout Bill in History. And Jake Johnson wrote this today, I believe. Published it today, Thursday, March 26th. And he correctly recorded the vote is 96-0, in contrast to Moscow Mitch. And he also points out that a $4.5 trillion fund was established to bail out the large corporations with little or no enforceable restrictions. He makes the point, okay, that I made, that the Oversight Committee is a joke and never did anything worth doing in 2008, 2009, 2010, the following years, and that such a committee is not going to do anything now. And Mnuchin and Trump know it. That's why they were willing to agree to it. It's a fig leaf. It's a pretense. And Nancy Pelosi knows it too. And there are quotes from PCCC really objecting to the bailout and pointing out how the bailout bill is biased towards big business. Public Citizen again says jaw-dropping corruption. And in its analysis bill, the consumer advocacy group Allied Progress talks about the language that would allow Mnuchin to waive the restrictions on the use of the corporate bailout funds at his discretion. At his discretion. And you see here in the article, there's a photo of the waiver clause in the bill. And so the secretary can basically do what he wants. The Oversight Committee can write reports and be as critical as they want, but they can't do anything about the waivers, and they can't do anything about any misuse, of funds. Zach Carter, Huffington Post, correctly said, the bill represents a transfer of wealth and power to the super rich from the rest of us, with the support of both the political parties. A damning statement about the condition of American democracy, unquote. Okay, so everybody knows the fund will be used to further consolidate business around the big businesses, to further concentrate it, to strengthen the oligarchy that calls itself American democracy. That is what we're looking at. That is what we're looking at the Fed supporting and facilitating. And facilitating. So the Democrats did secure some cash for people and some support for people. But they could have done much more. Why didn't they? Because it's clear that their purpose was to pretend to do things for people while aiding and abetting the Republican bailout of big business. Why? Because big business donors are so important to the Democratic Party and to Nancy Pelosi and to many centrist House people who are running for re-election in this campaign and will need contributions from big business. So meanwhile, the final bill would provide $1,200 mean tested payment to people earning less than $75,000, additional $500 per child. However, people who don't have direct deposit information on file with the Internal Revenue Service, which by the way is me and maybe you as well, could face significant delays in receiving the $1,200 payment. Hamza Shaban tweets, "You won't get the emergency funds for up to 4 months," Democratic aides said, "if you don't have direct deposit information on file with the IRS. And that includes the vulnerable people who don't have bank accounts." Evidently, 70 million people do have such an arrangement with the IRS, and they should see their payments arrive within a few weeks of the bill being signed into law. Of course, these payments are not now going to meet the deadline of April 1st. Won't help to pay the rent. They couldn't get it out in time to pay the rent. Ultimately, critics said the bill's benefits for people struggling to cope with massive corona-induced economic fallout are nowhere near sufficient to match the scale of the crisis. And that's what Jack Erasmus said as well. But Kyle Herrig, president of the advocacy group called Accountable by US, asked, "And what about the millions of struggling borrowers who don't know how they'll pay their next private student loan debt, or those who fall victim to predatory lenders during these desperate times?" Question mark. And he continues, "Congress should immediately begin working on another stimulus that ensures the finances of working America are supported as strongly as the balance sheets of corporate America, thanks to this particular package." Herrig, of course, is assuming that this package won't have any trouble getting through the House. Why not? Why wouldn't it have trouble getting through the House? Well, again, Nancy Pelosi is going to try to ram through either a unanimous consent deal on this or a voice vote on this. As long as people don't have to go on record, much of the Congress can stay away, shelter in place, and won't have to risk their health by coming back. But if someone objects to these arrangements, even one person, if they call for a count, if they call for a recorded vote, then that person will face the hostility of much of the rest of the House, because that's the way Nancy Pelosi, has set it up. So only a concerted effort by progressive members of the House would be able to block this bill. Crystal Ball this morning called for killing this bill because it was a sellout to big business, and starting afresh with separate bills, one bailout bill for people first, insisting that a bill like that be passed first before any bailouts for business are considered. Crystal was right on the money. She was quite right that that's what should be done. Okay. But unless an appreciable number of the progressives can organize together and can agree on them all supporting a recorded vote, they will not have the protection of numbers. Any single person who goes out there, including AOC, even a relatively small group like the Squad, would face tremendous hostility. It needs to be most of the progressive caucus who stand up and who oppose a voice vote, who oppose a unanimous consent arrangement, and who call for and who call for a recorded vote. I wish they would do that. I wish they would immediately then turn to Rashida Tlaib's bill, which we talked about here last night. Now, that bill is not part of the congressional record as yet. I checked today. I did not find it. Searched on the title of the act. I searched on her name. So it hasn't formally hit the congressional record as yet. However, Rashida said it was introduced, so I assume that it has been. But we went over it here yesterday. That bill, preloaded with $2,000 using actually a debit card, an electronic cash card, preloaded with $2,000 for every person in America, and recharged with $1,000 monthly until 1 year after the end of the coronavirus, is a far better bailout bill for most people. For a couple with 2 children, the initial cash bailout would be $8,000, not $3,400. And it would be sent to people immediately, because they could get those cash cards almost immediately. The prepaid cards could be distributed as U.S. debit cards and would be administered by the Treasury's the Bureau of the Fiscal Service. And most importantly, these cards could be distributed by direct mail. And the bill specifies all individuals with an active address on file with any government agency. So you wouldn't just have to be on file with the IRS. You could be on file with Social Security. You could be on file with Medicare. you could be on file with customs, I guess. You could be on file with whoever, as long as any agency of the government has your address. You would have a card sent to that address via USPS. If a card fails to arrive, you can do an in-person pickup. You can go to any FDIC-insured bank. You can go to a credit union. You'd be able to go to temporary card distribution stations that would be placed at local post offices. So you could go to a local post office. Cards would be there quickly. It would take a little time to assemble a dedicated emergency responder corps to perform outreach to at-risk populations, including people who are elderly, homeless, physically disabled, or live in remote areas of the United States, to ensure they get their debit cards. But this plan for distribution through debit cards is far better than what was produced so far in the current stimulus bill. Much quicker to get people money and much easier, and no means test on the front end, and no use of 2018 income tax records as the means test. Would get the money out there fast. And of course, in this bill, it would be funded by the U.S. Mint issuing two $1 trillion platinum coins. But we went over this yesterday in detail. Okay, I'm not going to do this again. I'm just going to point out that the means of distributing money through this bill and the bailout that would be distributed is far, far more generous and far, far more supportive of the workers and the middle class than anything remotely suggested in Pelosi's bill. Rashida Tlaib's bill is what the progressive community should turn to now, and the Progressive Caucus should lobby for that bill in the Congress. Lobby for it as hard as we are able to. Okay. There are some odds and ends I want to call your attention to before I consider your comments. There's another article that appeared in Common Dreams. Oops. My camera has gone south once again. I'll restart it. Having a little bit of a problem here. I'll be right back. I'm going to have to refresh my page, I'm sorry to say, because this is not co-op. Okay, for now I don't seem able to get my camera back. What I think I'm going to do for you is I'm pretty sure you can still hear me So I'm going to share my screen even though I'm not here to share it, since my camera is out. There's an article by Jake Johnson. House Democrats are urged to remove insidious attack on Social Security hidden within the Senate by coronavirus bill. Okay, I guess the provision is still there. This article appeared today on March 26th. This is something that's getting Social Security Works very excited. Okay, there's a provision still in the bill, Section 302. I'm sorry?
I can see common dreams.
Good. I think you can. Okay, there was a provision still in the bill that would let companies defer until next year their payment of the employer payroll tax, one of the primary funding mechanisms for Social Security. The bill would require that companies pay 50% of their owed 2020 payroll taxes by December 31st of 2021. Social Security Works thinks this language authorizes an insidious attack on the New Deal era program and must be stripped out before the final passage, okay, of the bill. Okay, I know this argument. It's been made by Michael Phelan of Social Security Works and Alex Lawson of Social Security Works, and it's been made for years by Social Security Works. Sorry. It's been made for years by Social Security Works. I'll just go through the argument here. So Social Security Works thinks that without the Social Security Trust Fund, without the accounting record that the businesses have paid their payroll tax into Social Security, what would happen there is, I don't know what's going on here. Here I am. I'm back, and my mic's back, and I'm sharing my screen, my stream. Okay, so let me go on with it. Jesus. Can't believe this. I know this is because of the heavy internet traffic tonight. I was warned by stream happen that this would potentially happen. But there is not much I can do about holding it steady. I can correct it, but I can't stop it from going out, I'm afraid. I'm cabled up to the internet already, so I shouldn't be having this trouble. Okay. Anyway, Social Security is convinced that the Republicans will come back later and just refuse to top up the trust fund again. Of course, they don't really top up the trust fund. What happens is they pay some payroll taxes, and this creates a record that the payroll taxes were paid, and this adds to the accounting record that is known as the trust fund. But it's not a fund of any kind, it's just an accounting record. So they're afraid that a payroll tax suspension or deferral chips away at the fundamental idea that Social Security is an earned benefit fully funded by the contributions of workers throughout by their lives. And that's a quote from Max Richtman, President and CEO of the National Committee to Preserve Social Security, and Medicare. This is the old argument of FDR. It's what, something like 72 or 73 years old now? It predates FDR's statement of the Economic Bill of Rights in 1944. Our justification of Social Security has to be the Economic Bill of Rights. We've got to start insisting on that, especially since we know that payments for Social Security, the funding for Social Security, can always be guaranteed by overt congressional financing or by minting platinum coins. We don't have to have payroll taxes paid anymore. If a payroll tax cut is useful to the economy in terms of getting stimulus, we can use that measure. What we have to do is abandon the myth that Social Security is in actual fact funded by payroll taxes. It's not. Payroll taxes are just a reserve drain. Social Security works. And National Committee for the Preservation of Social Security, NCPESSM, they have to abandon this 73-year-old argument. It doesn't work anyway. The conservatives constantly go after Social Security. They constantly go after the funding of Social Security anyway. They claim that Social Security contributes to the deficit. But the deficit is not in itself bad. And the national debt and the debt to GDP ratio do not diminish the capability of the federal government to continue to spend. That has nothing to do with fiscal sustainability. And we don't need to incur the debt anyway, because through overt congressional finance and through platinum coin seigniorage, we don't have to issue any more debt with either of those things. So the debt can be reduced gradually over 30 years as it falls due without inflation. So we need to forget about this bologna sausage. It's bologna sausage now. We have a different currency system than we had back in the 1930s. And the finance capabilities of the federal government are far, far greater. Let us pay attention to that. Let us argue on that basis. And let us forget this ancient justification for Social Security. We don't want to justify it as an earned benefit. We want to justify it as a human right of American citizens. We'll get more done that way when people stand up on their hind legs and insist on their rights. And one more thing for tonight. One more thing for tonight. On March 24th, there was an article that appeared in Jacobin. And let me share it with you. Let me share the screen one more time. If I can. It was written by Benjamin Y. Fong and Dustin Guastella, and the title of it is Bernie Sanders Should Retool His Campaign to Lead the Charge Against the Coronavirus. And they say Bernie can't continue campaigning as usual, and he certainly can't drop out of the race. We desperately need him to retool his entire operation to demand a robust government response to the coronavirus. Okay, so I'm going to leave the link for this. If I have not already left the link for it, I forget what I did, okay, in the description tonight, but I'll edit it if I haven't done it, and you can read this article. I don't want to go through the whole thing because I want some time to consider your comments. But the ideas put forward and argued for that Bernie should not be dropping out, he should stay in the race, but since he can't campaign in the way he has been campaigning, that he has to do social distancing, but he has to transform his entire organizational apparatus into a virus-fighting machine. That means fighting the virus and fighting its economic impact on the economy. And the article puts forward what that would look like, and I think it does a pretty good job of that. It also says the national media are waiting for Bernie to drop out so they can ignore him again. But if he uses the media attention to his and all of our advantage, that is the attention they're giving him by constantly badgering him about when he's going to get out, he can help transform public opinion into reasonable public policy. And I think he's right about that. He says the communications team can continue making inspiring videos. And by the way, they did today. They made a wonderful new video, okay, of Bernie's. Just a wonderful new video. Just essentially delivering the message that he's for the people and all the various things he's done for. I mean, it's just a wonderful video. It's so uplifting. So they can continue with that, but they can do it with health experts about how this challenge can bring us together rather than tear us apart. That's in direct opposition to Trump, by the way, I'd add. The authors also point out the vast volunteer network can take charge of mutual aid projects, as Crystal Ball recently suggested. Imagine a team of young people wearing Medicare for All t-shirts and delivering meals to nursing homes. I can imagine that. I think those shirts should also say, not me, us, as well as Medicare for All. And that they should have a picture of Bernie's face on them, too. And finally, Bernie's campaign cash can go towards a massive ad blitz explaining his policy, why it's necessary, and why the current response from the government is insufficient. The authors say the sweeping reorientation of the campaign is the only way to re-energize Bernie's base right now. He says, we cannot ask people to keep making calls about who they're voting for in the primary. We're just not in that reality anymore. Everyone is thinking about the coronavirus, and if they aren't, they will be very soon. An announcement like this would wake up every Bernie activist who's tuned out of the primary and make them believe again in the mantra, not me, us. But more important, this might be our best shot at avoiding total human and economic disaster. And then they say a few more things. I think maybe they should have added. Let me do their conclusion. By turning the millions of Sanders supporters into the largest and best organized grassroots lobby in the country, we can provide the muscle to demand measures that would otherwise never be taken seriously. Measures that could save lives in the millions. Bernie campaign staff, I know this isn't what you signed up for, but you might be our best shot at this world historical moment. The decision before you about the future of the campaign is one of life and death. I think this is a good message. And by the way, incidentally, if this isn't the message, and this is what the campaign starts doing, and assuming there aren't going to be any Democratic primaries until June, by the time June rolls around, even though Bernie can't campaign the way he has been campaigning, this way of campaigning could very well make him the overwhelming choice of Democratic Party voters in the primary, because he will be the only one leading. And he'll be leading through his mass movement, something that Joe Biden can never duplicate. So for us, we can do the thing we know has to be done, which is to successfully fight and win over the coronavirus, while at the same time we get the person that America most needs as the next president of the United States. And on that note, I am going to go to your comments. And Carmen says, screw landlords, they have too much to say in this neo-feudalism system. They do, and that's a correct description. This is increasingly a neo-feudal system. I completely agree. That's the kind of plutocracy they're trying to set up. I mean, what is Bloomberg other than a feudal lord with retainers? I mean, what is Gates? They're all feudal lords trying to run the place. I mean, right now they fight with us. But once they subdue us, they're going to be fighting with each other. You can bet on that. It is going to be feudalism. And the central government is just going to be a figurehead that they control. Carmen says, I scanned something about how AOC might object. If AOC objects and causes a recorded vote in the House, it will be the bravest thing she has ever done. But if she's alone, it will also be most probably the most dangerous thing she has ever done, and I hate to think of the consequences. On the other hand, if the Progressive Caucus goes as a body and says, no, this bailout bill for business is not going to happen. If you pass it over us, it's going to have to be with a recorded vote. Because we're going to insist on that. That's the one thing we can do. And if a recorded vote is required, it's on your head, Nancy Pelosi, because you coupled the two bills together. You didn't have to do that. You did it to silence us. Okay. Now, you won't be able to be silenced. You can't be silent. You have to record your vote and let the public see that you voted for this bailout. That you voted for this bailout. That you voted along with the Republicans. Let's see you run against the Shahid Buttar with that on your record, Madam Pelosi. And Rahul Majumdar says, progressive members of the House should coalesce to demand the splitting of the stimulus bill in the Senate. It was 95 versus Bernie. It was 95 versus Bernie, but not just the versus Bernie. There were other people who opposed that bill too. I mean, the conservatives. Ben Sassa, the Nebraskan guy. He opposed that bill for other reasons, but even though he opposed it, he had to vote for it. Carmen said, I wish they would do that too and turn all this neoliberal entitlement around. Kay says, technically what he did to her is rape as he put his finger inside her. Hope she can make a big enough impact to make him drop out, but not holding my breath on that. I think Al Franken should go public and ask Joe Biden to drop out. And Rahul Majumdar says, no debate, no changes, and no accountability. And Carmen says, even for the rich? Steve says, yes, Crystal was right. There should have been two different bills. First one for the people. Of course Crystal was right. But everybody knew that. Everybody knew that when Pelosi coupled the two things, it was bound to be a disaster. The bill was a disaster coming out of the House. It was too much of a bailout for business then, with her ridiculous means tests, and her inadequate money. 3.3 million people registering for unemployment. I mean, the lady has lost her grip. Her ideology has consumed her. Oh, okay. Got it, Dr. Joe. Yes, debit cards kind of keeps down cash virus contamination as well. Yes, it does. Yeah, as soon as you get the cash cards, you can disinfect them yourself. You can kill the virus on the cards. There's going to be virus on the cards too. But you got only one thing that you have to disinfect. Right? Whoa. There's my camera. My camera came back. Good. I didn't even know it was gone. Or maybe I inadvertently stopped sharing. Anyway, okay. Carmen says, as well, damn it. And Lana says, I wonder when Rashida is going to put the bill in the lineup. We need that bill. We need for the Progressive Caucus to organize around it as a real bailout bill for the people. Right now. That's the real bailout bill. Except for one thing. We should increase. No, I guess I should leave it as it is. I should leave well enough alone for now. Carmen says when we do dirt poor, get a few bucks. Sandy says, I would hope the squad and a few others got together and they have a plan. All they have to do is act together. All they have to do is to act together and act silently. And don't give Pelosi an opportunity to know what's going on. The one they have to get on their side is Pramila and Mark Pocan. And through them, the whole caucus. And she shouldn't hear about it until that happens. She shouldn't hear a rumbling until that happens. Lana says, we'll see how that goes. Rashida's pretty fierce. She is. She's very fierce. Sandy says, welcome back, Joe. Thank you, Sandy. Carmen says, I'm glad I'm not the only one having gremlins. Kay says, of course, they want to screw us on SS again. Pisses me off every damn time. They want to, but if we can get the Rashida bill seriously considered, even debated, along with the platinum coin, debated in Congress, covered by the press, people finally realizing the Treasury Department has the power to create money which it can deposit at the Federal Reserve in return for reserves. When people realize that, they won't be able to screw us on Social Security again. All we have to do is insist they pass a bill to replace those payroll tax funds with a platinum coin. That's the way it should be done right now. I've offered that in a blog post somewhere in the past. I've got a blog post on that somewhere in the past. Carmen says, we can see your face again. Carmen, pre-Fiat era? Yeah, Roosevelt's bill was passed in the pre-Fiat era. I mean, it was fiat here domestically, but nobody talked about fiat money then. The concept was not there. And Rahul Majumdar says, payroll taxes do not fund Social Security. Absolutely, Rahul. Rahul, I should say. Absolutely correct. Taxes and bonds do not fund anything. They drain reserves from the private sector. That is what they are for. That is their main function. What funds all federal spending, in the end, is congressional appropriations and the marking up of the Treasury spending account by the Federal Reserve using the authority it has gotten from the Congress. And Nancy Blackmore has joined. Hi, Nancy. Carmen says, insists. Lana says, I used to belong to the SS Works page as much as I appreciate by Richard Escal. I appreciate him too. I really like him. I like the Social Security Works people. Alex Lawson. They know how Social Security is actually funded. They have talked to Stephanie on many occasions. I went to one of their meetings myself back in 2010 when they were all sitting around a table talking about strategy. I gave them the basics of MMT right there in that room on that day. With Nancy Altman and Eric Kingson and Alex Lawson. all sitting there at that time. And they were sent links and materials on MMT right after that. They've known about it for a long time. They've known about it. They prefer FDR's old argument to keep repeating that, and repeating that. They're standing in the way of justifying Social Security as a human right for every American citizen. They don't want to argue based on the Economic Bill of Rights. In a fiat world, that is what we have to do. And also, they have to argue that Social Security is an entitlement because a right is an entitlement. Rights are entitlements. They are what we have a right to do or what we have a right to have. And we are entitled to those rights. The language of entitlement and the language of rights is the same language. It's closely related. We can't let them scare us out of using the language of entitlement. They say they're entitled to their property rights. Why shouldn't we say we're entitled to our human rights? Raul said, but Solana says, Rahul, you tell him, I gave up. All good generals know when to retreat. Yeah. Rahul says, hear, hear. And Rahul says, they never listen to a Canadian. Yeah, they don't listen to Canadians now. If we listened to Canadians, we'd have Medicare for all. Sandy says, so how do we get this info to Bernie? Which info do you mean, Sandy? Kay says, Biden equals yesterday's rapist, SMH. Sandy said, could it be sent to his son, Levy? He's on Facebook. He is. He is on Facebook, but what would you like to send to Levy? Please be a little more specific. And D. Hagelas has joined, and Kay says, you could try that, Sandy. And Joanne, Olenhouse Ricardio has joined. Hi, Joanne. I'm seeing a lot of old friends here tonight. And Kay is saying, Gillibrand, who forced Franken out, is now endorsing Biden. Yeah, what irony, right? Yeah, Gillibrand, who forced Al Franken out, is now endorsing Biden and not Bernie. Great. They will be on their side. Both are great progressives. I know. Great progressives. Oh, you might be talking about Jayapal and Pocan. I'm sorry. I didn't catch the reference. Okay, Lana says, we like Jayapal. Yes. On this live stream, we like Jayapal. Yeah, I wasn't serious about having Al Franken. I was serious about having him say that, but not because I thought anybody was going to listen to him. I just thought it would be a very effective move to make if you could get Al Franken to talk to Joe Biden and tell him to get out of the damn race because me too. Steve says Biden raped Tara. Apparently. Kay said he was a great loss to the Senate. He was something of a loss to the Senate. Something of a loss to the Senate. Kay says GOP and corporate Dems see Social Security like welfare, which it is not. Although I am not. Oh, I don't know. I'm losing control of my scroll bar here, folks. Excuse me. Sandy Degg. Oh, the Jacobin article. Yeah, the Jacobin article is a good one to transmit to them. What you were reading. Yeah, I wasn't exactly reading the Jacobin article, but yes, it is the Jacobin article. Right. I'm going to put the links in here so everybody will be able to flood Bernie's inboxes with the Jacobin article. Lana says, I'm close enough to visit Al in person. Carmen says, Lion Biden, go away. Yeah, I think so. Okay, folks, I think that's just about going to do it for tonight. We covered a lot of ground here tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. With everything that's happening, I suspect we'll be covering a lot of ground on Saturday night as well. But, okay, I'm off tomorrow unless something very strange happens that I just can't contain myself and I have to go on. And Joanne says, accepting breadcrumbs from politicians is what led us to Trump. Absolutely. And Carmen says it's safe. And Sandy says, yay, thanks for the links. I don't think I've put in the links yet, but I will put them in. I promise. I will edit the stream as soon as I get out of here, and I'll give you the links to everything I talked about tonight. And Lana says we could send it to Warren Gunnels, Kay, and Nina Turner. We could send it to Dave Sirota. He'd be a good one to send it to, I think. Maybe we should send it to all of them. Dolores says thank you, okay, and good night. Thank you, Dolores, for coming. Sandy says strange is the new normal. Yeah, bizarre is the new normal. Thank you, Kay, for coming. Okay, good night, everybody.